Hey guys, so this is my Big Agnes Scout UL2 tent. It's an ultralight backpacking single wall tent made out of silicone nylon. And I was just taking it out and airing it out, and I noticed that there is a little tiny tear at the bottom of the tent floor, right next to where the this pole tip is supposed to rest. I don't know if the pole slipped and went through. I don't really know what happened, but it's small enough. It's smaller than a nickel, probably more like the size of a dime. But regardless, any kind of hole or tear in your tent, you're going to want to repair. Most of the repairs that I've seen that people suggest is basically just you lay down some tape like this on one side of the tent, and then on the other side, so the interior, you would just lay down a huge gob of silicone seam sealer, assuming that the tent is also a silicone impregnated material. I find that kind of a visually unappealing repair, and in terms of like long-term durability, I don't know, you can peel that up. So I thought I'd do a proper repair on it, and I already started, but I wanted to show you guys the process in case you ran across something similar and you want to repair it. So basically the steps are you locate it and clean the area with like a denatured alcohol. Just kind of swab the area to clean it and degrease it. And then you apply down some tape. This is just like a packing tape. And I lay it down to basically close up any kind of gaps and to keep the material from shifting. And then on the other side, so this is the side, the interior of the tent, you're going to want to patch it with also a similar material like a ripstop nylon. Now, I didn't have a material that matched on hand, that matched the color, so I actually used, this is the tent stake bag. Now, this bag is extra long. The stakes, there's like 3 inches extra on the top. So what I did was I cut 1 inch off the bottom, and then I'm going to sew this back together. But that 1 inch off the bottom gave me enough material to where I could make a few squares and still have some left over. So this is a 1x1 square. I cleaned it with the denatured alcohol on both sides, and I made basically a little patch. And what you're going to want to do is apply the silicone seam sealer onto the patch here, and just kind of spread it like a light layer over the, off the edges on one side. And then you're going to center it over the hole and press it down and smooth out any air bubbles or anything that you may have in there. You don't want to totally press out all the glue. You want the glue to seat in between the two. You don't want it to be glue starved. So you want to push it out just where glue's coming out the edges, and make sure glue comes out the edges to hold those edges down. And then you leave that side to dry. When that side's dry, it should take 4 to 6 hours, depending on the temperature, humidity, and whatnot. It can go quicker. I mean, this has only been an hour, and it's no longer tacky to the touch. And then what that does is you want to tape that side so that way you can see the sealant doesn't leak out and everything's held in place really nicely. So the next step is to remove the tape very carefully. And you can see now that you can't even see that on this side where the hole is. But I'm not worried about it coming up, but I just want some like double insurance on this. So what I'm going to do, let me zoom in, is I'm going to apply a patch of the same dimensions right on the other side of it. Now I'm going to wipe it down with denatured alcohol just to clean this area. Okay. And it evaporates quickly. And I'm going to put the seam sealer on there, or the sealant. I'll put the cap on here. And I'm just going to spread it around so it comes off the edges. Actually, I'm going to apply a little bit more, just so I get a decent amount on there. Okay, and just kind of pull it off the edges. Just Just kind of make sure it coats it all pretty well. Okay, so that's pretty saturated now with the silicone. And I'm gonna line it back, I wanna line it up so it's matched directly over that other patch. So just kind of start from a corner and drop it down. And you can shift it around if you need to, if it's not laying perfectly square on top of the other one. And the reason why I want it square on top of the other one is I'm actually gonna sew this patch in also and then seam seal the stitching. But so I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of smooth out all those little air bubbles. If there's any air trapped in there, it looks pretty well sealed. So you can see that's laying nice and flat. The silicone's just coming out the edges just a little bit. I don't want to make a huge mess here, but it's just coming out just a little bit. And I'm going to leave that glue or that silicone in there to create that bond. So now I'm going to put this outside, give it some sun, and just give it an opportunity to dry, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the process for stitching this, selecting the thread and needle size to stitch this on. So it's just a super permanent, really durable, long-lasting patch. So we'll be back. Hey guys, so we gave the patch an opportunity to dry. All that silicone's dry. It's been a couple hours. Feels pretty good to the touch. It'll fully cure in about 24, but it's fine now to start on the sewing process. As you can see, when you look at it with light behind it, both those patches are perfectly on top of each other. So that's what you want to make sure is the case for this next step. If they're not, then you want to take that into account and kind of sew in, so that way you sew in a little bit so you know that both patches are going to get sewn together. If you need to, you can do little pencil lines or whatever makes it easier for the sewing process. Now I went ahead and put a size 80 needle into the machine, and the thread I'm using is a color matched Gutermann polyester thread. You do not want to use cotton. You want to make sure that you use a polyester thread for outdoor stuff. This is Gutermann's all-purpose thread. It's a Tex 30 thread. You could probably get away with doing a Tex 20. I wouldn't recommend going thicker than the Tex 30 though. You want to make sure that, I really recommend the Gutermann thread. I think it's a lot better than the like Coates and Clark's and some of these other threads out there. So make sure you use a premium thread, especially if you're going to go through the trouble of sewing this down. The machine I'm using is an industrial Bernina. You don't necessarily have, you can do this on any machine. Straight stitch machine is actually preferable because the needle hole is smaller, so it better supports the material on the underside. And you can use a normal foot. I'm going to use, this is like a top stitching foot. It's got a guide so I can stitch a 1/16 of an inch away from the edge perfectly. So it'll make for a really clean appearance, but it'll also keep the stitch relatively close to the edge so I don't have to worry about that edge peeling up as much, as if I were to put the stitch closer in. If you are going to use a zigzag stitch machine, put the needle position in the far left or the far right. And that's because if you just leave it in the center, only the material is only going to be supported on the front and back as that needle comes through on the needle plate. Whereas if you put it to the left or right, because it's on the edge, you're going to get support from 3 sides as opposed to 2, so you're less likely to have the material pulled down, and it'll make for a cleaner stitch. Do the stitch length. I'm doing it around 2.5 millimeters. You don't want to go too long, but you also don't want to go really, really short where you're just going to perforate the fabric. So something like maybe 8 to 10 stitches per inch will work. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the middle here. I'm going to drop my foot. Let's see if I can zoom in so you guys can see. Just take your time on this. You want to make sure you get oh, my feed dogs are down. So just go nice and slow. And as you approach the edge, if you feel like you're going to shoot too far off, lift up the presser foot and just kind of rotate the material. You'll notice I didn't back stitch over, I didn't do a lock stitch. That's because I'm going to sew back over what I just did, so there's no need for it, and it just is cleaner that way. You can see my needle is going to want to travel over the patch, so I lift up the presser foot and I move it back so it stays within a 1/16 of an inch from the edge. Sorry about that. I'm going to have to bring the tent over. That's part of the pain of working with big material like this, but okay, so I'm still 1/16 of an inch space there. And as I approach the edge, I don't want to overshoot it, so I'm going to lift it. And move it so I maintain that spacing. Okay, make sure the material is flat. Okay, there's the needle. Now I'm going to go back once more and I'm going to sew. Now I want to line up my hole. I'm going to go back in the same holes from that first row of stitching. So I'm going to kind of move it and find it, and then there it is. Okay. And that's good. So I basically stitch like 4 stitches over the original starting point, and then that way both sides are secure, and then you're not worried about it lifting up. I'm going to pull the material out, snip it here. So snip off the tails. And just kind of stretch on the stitch. Make sure you relieve any tension in the stitching there. Okay, so there it is. Now it's stitched on. Now I'm going to pull the stitches to the bottom side, the top of the stitch. So you pull on the bottom thread and you'll see that loop form, and you're going to pull that top stitch out to the bottom. And I'm going to do that on both sides. So you can see I just pulled it out. So now the both are there. And same with this one. There's that little tiny loop. Here it comes. Okay, so now all the loops are on the bottom, and I'm going to trim those, and I'm just going to melt the ends and push them down. And then I'm going to go through, and once this is all trimmed and burned, then I'm just going to thin out some seam sealant from the bottom, and I'm just going to wipe it over the stitches, and that will seal these stitches up. And then that's it. That's the repair. So now you have the little hole or little tear is totally enclosed between two pieces of material with seam sealant in between, and this thing is going to be more durable than the tent body, so nothing to worry about there. And then that's the way I do my hole repair. So if you run across a little tear in your tent, that's how to go about doing it. Alright, good luck guys.